Welcome back to another episode of the Owl Talk podcast. This is Joe Palazzolo, and the theme of today's podcast is community involvement. Sure, each of our chapters is engaged in community service, and yes, our chapters conduct a great deal of philanthropic events. All of that hard work is performed in the service of God and man, like our creed suggests. However, our undergraduate chapters are not just volunteers for the community, they live in these communities. And I'm sure all of our brothers listening, young and old, can tell some fun stories about living in their college towns. I'm sure they have some head-scratching stories from living in their college towns. And I'm sure they have some deeply interesting stories about living in their college towns. Today, I believe we are going to get one of the more interesting stories about our brothers being residents in their town. And that story is going to come from our chapter at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. Today, I'm happy to welcome Alpha-Eta Chapter sage Will Katabian to the podcast. Will is going to bring us inside of our incredible Alpha-Eta chapter at William and Mary, but we're also going to talk about a community group that was started by students in the neighborhood called Our Williamsburg. All of that and much more coming up. But first, hey, Will, welcome to the Owl Talk podcast.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad that we're going to get to talk about everything going on in your chapter and in your neighborhood. But before we get to Alpha-Eta chapter, before we get to Our Williamsburg, I would love for you to talk about your background a little bit. Maybe tell our listeners where you're from, where'd you grow up, what's your major, and then maybe more importantly, what brought you to Sigma Pi?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my name is Will Katabian. I'm our chapter sage. I'm originally from Virginia Beach, which for those who are not familiar with the geography of Virginia and Williamsburg is about an hour from campus. So I'm still in my backyard, more or less. William and Mary, also for those not crazy familiar, it's a smaller school. We have about 6,000 undergrads. We, hark upon the idea of community and values and whatnot. So initially when I was going to college, I'm now a senior, of course, but back when I was a senior in high school and college seemed like this big scary thing. The smaller class, the more kind of community feeling gave me that sense of comfortability of home in a way. And here I am now. Like I said, I'm a senior. I'm studying computer science here, which is going to probably be a little bit confusing when we start talking about political science and stuff here in the next 10 minutes. But I'm not involved in any government or poli-sci. Computer science only, maybe a minor in data science. And another, interestingly enough, talk about Sigma Pi. Obviously, I live by the creed. I love the creed. I'm a senior here. I've been here for 4 years, chapter sage, this, that, the other, right? But when I got on campus, which you may have been able to guess when I said I was scared of the big, bad college, I had no intention of joining a chapter at all. In fact, it was actually my mom who persuaded me to join a fraternity. I have a lot of legacy here, so my aunts.
Let's go.
Yeah, she was very, very, very hard pressed to see me not interested in Greek life at all. I was one of those, I really just want to get my degree. I don't want any distractions. I was definitely falling victim to some of the stereotypes that we know are not true. But I got on campus, very hard set on getting this degree. I rushed around. Our rush is in the fall, pretty much the second you touch down. I think my first recruitment event was like the first day of orientation. So there was no time to prepare at all. All these new Greek letters were very foreign to me. I checked it out. I enjoyed it, but I still had my reservations. Called my parents. My father was here. He was in a fraternity. My aunt was in a sorority. You can kind of see where this conversation went. More than likely, they were like, look, I would highly, 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 highly recommend you join one of these things. They are more than what you might see on Instagram. And obviously, I'm very glad I did. It's one of those things that I look back on, and if there was one decision, because I've made plenty of mistakes here, of course, but if there's one decision that I don't think was a mistake, it was joining this chapter in Sigma Pi specifically. It's changed pretty much the entire trajectory of my college career, and I could not be more grateful for it.
Wow. Wow. I love that. Did you say that both your dad and your aunt went to William and Mary?
Yes, sir. So my father was
And
here. He was a Pi Lamb, and my aunt was a Chi. So I think I'm not sure if our chapter was active when they were here, but they weren't in it, unfortunately.
we love fraternity and sorority families. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you
of
for
course, deep
thank
rooted.
you for that background. Um, Maybe tell us a little bit about Alpha Eta Chapter. Your chapter sage. I know you've got a lot going on there. How's the semester looking for you guys? What about the larger academic year? What's going on down there?
It's going well. So we're one of those chapters that's kind of constantly going through change and growth. For some context, when I joined, we had about 40 members, which so a very modest size. But it was fine. But it's especially like myself and my pledge class thought that we could do more. We currently sit at around 80. We're expecting to break 90 in the spring, no problem. With future goals, I think our 2 year plan is to break that 100-man chapter. It's one of those awards we're really, really looking to hit soon. I think it's very possible. We've just been, digging in, doing our thing. We're now the largest chapter on campus. This past uh, convocation, we got the most improved chapter, which was, a real great showing of our work. Definitely all the boys were pumped to grab that. Something a little more hardware oriented to show our progress. So, like as you could imagine, operating a 40-man chapter is a little bit different than operating an 80-man chapter, and certainly a 100-man chapter. So there's plenty of hiccups as we go. But with that kind of comes growth. So come November, we'll be electing our new executive board. I'm going to be phased out, as my mom always says. She comes to all our tailgates and stuff. This past Parents Weekend, one thing she said was, "It really seems like you and your guys are like the old guard. You're definitely getting replaced." I was like, "Thanks, mom." But so we're working on kind of getting these new guys in, making sure they're well trained because every semester is different. This one in particular, we're a little bit out of philanthropy season, but we're working on something along those lines. But our big focus is we're planning our first annual parents formal. It's something that our parents have been really, really wanting for a while now, and the logistics just have never seemed to fall into place. So we're trying to get that on the books. We have homecoming next week. I'm not sure how many other colleges celebrate homecoming, at least to the extent that William and Mary does, but it's a very, very big deal here. They separate a whole week, and it's extremely Greek life oriented. So we have a sorority we're partnered with, and we do this, that, and the other. It's basically a week long alumni event. It's essential for alumni connection, chapter to stability, you name it. So that's like been our big thing for the past month. I'm getting gray hairs as we speak, even thinking about it. But one more week, so I'm really excited for that. But one thing I would love to talk about, which is our huge blockbuster event. This is in the spring, so unfortunately, I'm not going to be around to plan it. Um, Maybe it's not so unfortunate, but big event. We call it Woodstock. It was one of the things that I talked about a lot at Convocation, just because it's something that I've seen start. It was our first annual was my freshman year, and we're pushing onto our fourth, of course. But it's something that has continued to get better and better. It's our blockbuster philanthropy. As the name suggests, it's a music festival. William Mary is a liberal arts college, if you weren't already familiar with that. So there's plenty of artists, plenty of musicians, plenty of people who are going to come to a music festival. So we gather up all the bands. We usually have probably 8 to 9 auditions, and we pick the top five that we feel are going to fill the space the best, and we sell a ticketed music festival, and it goes rather well. This past semester, we smashed our philanthropy record. We raised a little bit over 8,000, which is more than we've ever touched before. I think our previous philanthropy record was 4,000 at the last Woodstock, and anything not Woodstock related was about $1,000. Just not a ton of students on campus, so these are huge numbers for us. But what was really special is William and Mary themselves advertised and partnered with us for the event. So we had scheduled it for the day for admitted students, which happens kind of midway through the spring semester. And that was William and Mary's 5 o'clock event, which I've never seen or heard of before. And it definitely felt special seeing the pamphlet they're handing out to all the parents. And right there down the line at 5 o'clock was Sigma Pi's Woodstock for CHKD. So extremely special. I'm extremely prideful of it, if you can't tell already. But
Yeah,
those are kind of the big things we're looking at working here. Our motto, I guess, more or less, is don't get complacent, continue to improve. And that's just becoming more and more and more apparent as time goes on.
Well, and you all are living that that chapter motto, are you not? I mean, that's how you win the most improved chapter award. You know, you constantly improve. So, congratulations on that. You know, on this Woodstock event, I just have to note, like that's the gold standard that we hope chapters can achieve with their programming. That the programming becomes so big, is run so efficiently, and is such a positive, impactful event for the campus community that the universities and the colleges jump in and they say, "Hey, can we partner with you on this?" That's like the gold standard. So well done, well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
So today's topic is community involvement. And to start talking about this topic a little bit, maybe you can give us a very high level answer to the question, what is our Williamsburg?
Perfect. Well, you have the right guy. Our Williamsburg is a student-led organization. It's extremely similar, but not the same as a political action committee. The quick breakdown is we operate nearly identically as a political action committee, but we're a registered student organization, so we cannot fundraise. That's pretty much the big difference, fundraising versus not fundraising, but we have access to campus. So what essentially we are, I suppose I should cover this first, is in Williamsburg, there's a little bit of a power imbalance. For a little bit of context, the city is run on the council system. So there's five city councilors, and they make every single decision based on a majority vote. As you could imagine, the average age of those councilors is not my own. We are pretty much dead set in a neighborhood. So my neighbor to my left is a 20-year-old rock climbing student, and the neighbor to my right is 85 years old and doesn't speak in the same dialect as us anymore. So there's a huge disconnect between the students and the residents because there is no middle ground. If it was like students and maybe young families, that's something, right? But these are people who have been here for years, generational, right? So there's always been this there's a tension in the air between the students and the residents of Williamsburg. So what Our Williamsburg is attempting and attempts to do, and I think we've been rather successful, is to kind of mend this gap a little bit. It's a little explanatory in the name, Our Williamsburg, um, not to be mistaken with ours and mine, me personally, but our as Williamsburg conglomerately, right? So what we do is advocate for student rights. If you go to our Instagram at Our Williamsburg, you can see right in our bio, advocating for student rights. But more kind of substantively, I think is the word I'm looking for. Something more official with substance is we try our best to encourage students to vote, to exercise your rights, try and make your voice more than just, an actual voice. Like we can, help garner change, and that's something we try to do. So for some history, Our Williamsburg was founded in 2022. It was founded in the Alpha-Eta Chapter Sigma Pi. It's actually a rather funny story. We had actually in the house that I live in currently, we were having a rush event, and my landlord had come by to fix a light or something. He wasn't my landlord at the time. I was a sophomore, but the landlord at the time came to fix a light or, maybe a toilet or whatever. Right.
Doing
And he
whatever
walked
landlords
in.
do when they come by, right?
Yeah. Well, he didn't fix it. So he wasn't doing much, but what he did do was he came in and he saw all these young people. He's, certainly a politician himself. And he got up on a table in my now living room and started this whole spiel about how we have all of these young minds, all of these young voices. What are we doing other than being complacent? And it was actually, for a guy who couldn't fix my light bulb, it was rather well said. And it kind of sparked a little bit of fire. So one of my pledge brothers, Matthew Beartu, and a senior at the time, Blake Batchelor, sat down with him sometime in the following week. This is fall 2022, by the way. And they plotted to, like, how can we get the students involved? So we did what every fraternity would probably do in our shoes, and we got in all of our sorority group chats and we told them to get involved. And what that ended up doing was we got a crowd of probably 100 or 200 students to pull up to the city council hearing meeting where they were talking about, proposed laws and whatnot, and show the city that we exist, we're here, and we have a voice. And it was it was incredible. Mind you, our Williamsburg hadn't been started yet. This was just, what can we do as a fraternity to help? And it was like, wow. I remember I was in there rather early. Just, of course, it was closer to home than the other people. So I watched most of the people walk in, and it just kept going. Um, the council chambers were full before the meeting even started. You could see on their face, they're like, oh my God, like this is something we're going to have to keep an eye on. And so obviously that was a massive success. So following that, Matthew and Blake sat down and they started this club, Our Williamsburg, officially registered with the school, began
Yeah.
making actual moves. And following that, this was this was fall of 2022, but I think specifically it was around October. So within the next month, there
October
was
is
going to be a city
October is when
council.
they formalized the R. Williamsburg group on campus.
Yes, sir. So
Yeah.
October
Okay. Okay.
2022 was when it really, really became a thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And coincidentally, in November 2022 was a city council election. So our natural next step, I say I wasn't even involved at the time actually, but the group's natural next steps were to get on board with the city council election. So they really wasted no time. We found two candidates, endorsed them, and took it to the polls. It was a massive, massive, massive success. One of our candidates, uh, Councilwoman Kernshear, Stacy Kernshear, she's incredible. She got elected, and not only did she get elected, but she broke the all-time Williamsburg City record for votes received, and we broke the all-time Williamsburg City record for student voters, both in the same election. So massive, massive success. And we kind of watched the sun set, which was awesome. It was, we started something, and we we got it done. It was incredible. Uh,
Yeah.
Again, I wasn't
Yeah.
involved at this point at all. Yeah,
So before we dive into some of the more recent things from that spring, I kind of want to put a cap on that fall 2022 almost campaign is what it sounds like.
yeah,
You were a group of students motivated by, in this case, your landlord, and then of course motivated by yourselves. You backed a candidate in the local town council election, and they won. The candidate won. So before we jump into the spring, and when people came back to you and said, "Hey, can we get our Williamsburg continuing to move?" What was the immediate reaction? The immediate reaction after your candidate won the council election?
oh my goodness. I mean, I don't even know. It was very electrifying. It was kind of one of those things where, like, we're a bunch of students. We don't really know what's going on, but we gave it our best shot, and it like worked. It felt like we almost like had defeated like a bad guy or something. Like it felt like we won against the city, even though we're working as one. But it was something that, at least me personally, I didn't think was even realistic. I was like, guys, what are we? This we might be in over our head here. And a lot of people I think shared that sentiment, and they were quickly proven wrong, including myself. And that's the second I got involved. I joined up the club the second they won. I was instantly inspired. I wasn't terribly cynical, but I wasn't one of those guys who could see this happening. I really wasn't. It just seemed like, what are we really doing here?
But
And
that,
a
but,
lot
but
of people can agree.
but that feeling of victory after winning a political election, or your preferred candidate winning, that's what everyone feels when they back a candidate and the candidate wins, and you almost have this perception of this can't possibly work out, and then it works, and you go, oh my god, we won. you know and now you have to govern. Now you have
Yeah,
to actually govern, in this case, a town council, which we'll talk about. But let's go back to the larger story. You were mentioning that some folks came to you in spring 2023 now because there might have been, an opportunity to maybe work with the police in a different way. And how did that go?
yeah. So spring 2024, actually. So we had almost a
Spring
1 year
2024.
hibernation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So come spring 2024, after really hibernation is the word. I would go on behalf of the organization. Like I said, after the election victory, I quickly joined up, got as involved as I could. I found it incredible. So I would go to the city council chambers, remind them we're here. Here is what we would like to see. I'm speaking on behalf of students. I think my exact script was, my name is Will Katabian. I'm a member of Our Williamsburg. And then demand is not the word, but here is what we'd like to see as students. I was kind of like the spokesperson for the student body, or at least for Our Williamsburg. Um, and that's all we really did for a year. And I think it did something, but it wasn't as, there wasn't as much substance certainly as that election. But come spring 2024, people started coming to us and they were asking like, hey guy, I had a problem with like a cop or something. And I think most college students have, at least run into the police in some aspect. They're not they're there to govern us. So we weren't exactly raising a huge brow. We being myself and my like business partner, I call him. He's one of my other pledge brothers. His name's Matthew Boothby. Um, we were kind of the guys holding the reins at this point. And they came to us and we started seeing the same thing. I mean, it was the most obvious trend line I've ever seen was that, people were not, they felt as though the cops were harassing them. Whether that's, or at least at the time, it was hard to prove any substance to it. But I mean, there was certainly a trend line there. So Matthew and I decided, okay, let's start this thing back up. So I took the role of the president of Our Williamsburg, which I still hold. I'll be relinquishing that come spring, but for the time being, I'm still the president. Matthew is our vice president. Matthew Boothby, not Matthew Beartu, the founder. He had stepped back, and Blake Batchelor, the other co-founder, had graduated. But we took the reins, decided to get it back in gear, and we essentially took our old school playbook and had everyone come to the council chambers. So it wasn't just me this time. It was another 100 students. And what was different was this was an open forum. So not only were we there and visible, we had the ability to speak. So what would have been a 1 hour city council meeting quickly turned into a 4.5 hour meeting because there
Oh
were
boy.
so many students with so many anecdotes, so many requests. It was pretty intense, I must say. I mean, come hour 3, even I was ready to get out of there. I have an exam or something next week. Let's get the show on the road. But
Well, I
the
mean, you're a
students were
college student,
so
right?
fired up. Exactly. I mean, I should have brought my tents, but the students were so fired up. It was like, wow, we are really back. We're doing this again. We can make a difference. And it really was the first thing I've seen that was like overnight. I mean, I ended up talking with the police chief, really great guy. We hashed it all out. He went or at least he told me that he would go to his department, have a chat with them. And we haven't heard anything since. So
Right.
I
Well,
would
I mean,
consider that a huge win.
I think what you're experiencing is what we find in the professional world and in life really, which is usually it's just a communication error. I mean, it sounds like you have a conversation with the chief of police and you resolve the issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right because all of these people that I've met who I haven't personally had problems with, but I'm hearing these stories. It's, they're not the big bad wolf. They're doing their job. They're great men, actually. And it was quick resolution. So I felt like, I don't want to take all the credit for it, or our Williamsburg rather take all the credit for it, but I think the students having some sort of voice, something a little bit more substantive to talk with these, governing bodies, it's been very, very beneficial.
Well, and this is really the history of college students throughout the history of America is that they get involved in their communities, and maybe that was in a bit of a lull for the last couple of decades, but not just at William and Mary, but around the country, we see college students really taking active roles in their neighborhoods, and I'm so glad that you've been able to do that very successfully with Our Williamsburg. I think I heard you say that you'll be done with your term as president of Our Williamsburg this spring coming up. So
Yes, sir.
I'm just curious your perspective. What do you think comes next for that organization? What's the next iteration of that organization?
I'm actually very glad you asked that because I'm not quite done.
Ah, there you go.
of course, we have the November election coming up, and we are nonpartisan, so we aren't meddling with the presidential election. However, what's very unique about this election is I mentioned previously that we have a five-body city council system. So it's all majority vote. This year in particular, there are three seats up for election, which is a huge deal, which means city council majority is up for reelection. And of course, our Williamsburg, after what I would consider a smash hit success spring, is back here in the fall. And one thing that we've done, which we've never done before, previously we got Councilwoman Kernshear elected, but she's not a student, is we now have a student running.
Oh, wow.
So not only do we have the full student body backing towards an actual student, but it's going to be the first time in a long time that a student's been elected. I think the last one was current Councilman Caleb Rogers, who was elected, 4 years ago, I believe. And he's now up for reelection, but not running. So it's very important to get another student onto there because without our candidate, her name is Ayanna Williams. She is fantastic. Without Ayanna running, we would have no more student representation on city council. So that's, of course, not ideal. So we're really hitting the ground running with this. One thing that we did this semester that's very different than fall 2022 is a guy I was working with named Grayson actually broke off from us and started a real political action committee called Williamsburg for All. So I had mentioned ever so briefly in the beginning that we are not allowed to fundraise because we're not a real PAC. We're just a registered student organization or RSO. But now we do have a PAC and we can fundraise. And Ayanna's campaign is going beautifully, beautifully. She's had multiple campaign events. Her launch event was this last month and it was amazing. We had, again, now or soon to be former councilman Caleb Rogers, the previous student, come speak. Very elegantly said. But we're full force, full steam ahead for this election. We're very, very hopeful of Ayanna, and we're certainly pouring all of our resource and effort into it. So that's going to be my big last play, I think, as president. Then we'll, pass the torch and make sure that students, for as long as possible, are represented and defended in this community.
Love it. Love it. What a great plan. I mean, it sounds like you are building an organization that's built not just for success today, but for success in the future too. And I kind of want to transition to talk about the future a little bit, but let's talk about you, Will. What do you want to do after you graduate? What are your life plans at this very early stage of your life?
Oh, well, that's a scary one. Again, like I said, I'm a senior, so I'm coming up on the end of my time here and as an undergraduate, which is scary. I study computer science, so my ultimate goal is to be a software developer, which has absolutely nothing to do with politics at all. So that's always where people raise a brow. It's like, what are you doing here, man? How did you end up in this chair? And to that, I have no idea at all, other than Sigma Pi, which I'm of course grateful for, right? But I'd love to see myself in DC. I've had a couple gigs over the summers, internship wise. I was a software engineer for one company in Boston, Margin Edge. Amazing experience. I was a web developer for a contractor in Virginia Beach, which was also a great experience. So I'm hoping I can spend something along those lines to maybe get a job. But that all remains to be seen. But things are looking up, I would say. But you know, the job isn't finished till it's finished, and I'm not at the finish line quite yet. So until then, going to continue to try and better myself, better the people around me, hopefully leave an impact. I would love if I could come back for homecoming and people still knew my name. That's the ultimate goal.
There you go. It sounds like you're on that path, Will. I mean, all the impact you've had, not just with our Williamsburg, but with Alpha-Eta, it sounds like you're on that path. Hey, before we wrap up, this has been a fascinating conversation, by the way. Really, really interesting. I know that our listeners are going to really enjoy hearing this, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of them reached out to you to pick your brain a little bit. But before we,
Yeah.
we wrap up, I wonder if you have any parting comments for our listeners.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that as well, actually. If it hasn't been gathered already, this fraternity is a little bit more than a group of friends doing fun stuff. I hope anyone listening to this who only views it as such can take my experiences and, do better by themselves. Of course, I've done a lot of work for the chapter and the community, but all this stuff ultimately comes back to me, and I wouldn't have it without the fraternity. And it's one of those things that I think I think the growth of the Alpha-Eta chapter, my chapter, can really just be attributed so heavily to people now seeing past, campus, past our, little organization, and that like there are things that we can do in the fraternity with the fraternity that actually make change, whether that be in the community, like with Our Williamsburg, or for yourself, with me, I have all this crazy experience. Who knows, right? My name might be out there and a guy might have heard about this Our Williamsburg stuff or an alumni, and they're like, oh, well, I know this guy because did this, A, B, and C. So it's something that I really, really try to instill into our freshmen as they come in. But for anyone listening, there's more to this fraternity than you might realize, and it's going to be up to you to kind of grasp that, make it into your own thing. So please don't take it for granted. It's a blessing to be here. And but at the end of the day, it really is what you make it, and it can be anything that you want to make it.
Great message. Great message for everyone listening, Will. Thank you for being a guest on Owl Talk. I appreciate having you here today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
And thank you to everyone who listened to today's episode about community involvement. For the latest on what's going on in the world of Sigma Pi fraternity, follow us across social media. We are at Sigma Pi, all one word, on all the major platforms, Instagram, X, Facebook. On YouTube, we're at Sigma Pi fraternity, all one word. Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to everyone joining us for the next Owl Talk podcast.